The dust hung thick over the valley like a shroud of the damned. Marcus Valerius could taste iron on his tongue, whether from the air or his own fear he couldn't say. He was 17, barely old enough to grow a proper beard, and this was his first true battle. Around him, 120 men stood in tight formation, shields locked, breathing in unison like some great wounded beast waiting to strike. "Steady," growled Centurion Gaius, a man whose face looked like it had been carved from the same stone as the Capitoline Hill. "When I was your age, boy, I pissed myself before my first fight. If you need to do the same, do it now. Once we advance, there's no stopping." Marcus swallowed hard. Ahead, perhaps 200 paces distant, the Samnite army waited, a sea of oval shields and glinting spear points that seemed to stretch to the horizon. There were thousands of them. The stories said Samnites were born with swords in their hands, that they knew mountain warfare like Romans knew law and order. This was 293 BCE, and Rome had been bleeding itself dry in these cursed hills for generations, fighting an enemy that refused to simply surrender and accept the inevitable Roman peace. But something was different today. Marcus could feel it in the way Centurion Gaius smiled, not with joy, but with the grim satisfaction of a man who finally held a winning hand after years of losing at dice. "You see those bastards?" Gaius pointed with his gladius toward the enemy line. "They think they know how Romans fight. They think we'll crash into them like waves against rock, spend ourselves, then fall back exhausted while they stand firm. That's how every army since Romulus has done battle. Charge, push, break, or be broken." He spat into the dust. "They're wrong." A horn blast split the air, not the wild, chaotic blare of barbarian war trumpets, but something precise and controlled, a series of notes that meant something specific to every man in the legion. Marcus felt his muscles tense involuntarily. "Forward!" Gaius roared. "First maniple, advance at the walk." And they moved. Not a mad rush, not a heroic charge, a walk. Steady, measured, shields up, breathing controlled. Marcus found his legs moving automatically, years of training overriding the howling terror in his gut. The man to his left was Quintus, a butcher's son from the Subura, who'd once killed a man for cheating at dice. To his right stood Tiberius, whose father owned enough land that he shouldn't have been in the ranks at all, but who'd volunteered anyway, because, as he put it, he was bored of farming. They were hastati, the youngest men of the legion, positioned in the front line of the manipular formation. Behind them, separated by deliberate gaps, stood the principes, older, more experienced, their equipment slightly better. And behind them, the triari, veterans whose very presence was an insurance policy written in blood and iron. "When it comes to the triari," went the old saying, "things are serious." These men only fought when everything else had failed. But today, if Gaius was right, it wouldn't come to that. The Samnites began their own advance, faster, more aggressive. They were brave men defending their homeland, and they came on with the fury of those who had everything to lose. Marcus could see their faces now, bearded, snarling, eyes bright with that particular madness that comes before men try to kill each other. 50 paces. 30. "Prepare for impact," Gaius bellowed. 20 paces. Marcus could smell them now, sweat, leather, the strange herbal scent of the oil they used on their weapons. 10 paces. A Samnite warrior directly ahead locked eyes with Marcus. The man was older, maybe 30, with a scar that ran from his forehead down across his nose. He was screaming something in his mountain dialect, something that sounded like a prayer and a curse combined. 5 paces. Marcus braced his shield, set his feet, prepared to receive the charge. The world exploded into chaos.
Shield crashed against shield with a sound like thunder. The man beside Marcus went down immediately, a Samnite spear finding the gap between his neck and shoulder. Blood sprayed hot across Marcus's face. He thrust blindly with his gladius, felt it catch on something, leather, flesh, he didn't know, and wrenched it back. The scarred Samnite was still there, pressing against Marcus's shield with inhuman strength, his own sword jabbing toward Marcus's exposed side. Training saved him. Marcus twisted, let the blade scrape across his mail shirt, punched out with his shield boss, felt it connect with something that crunched. The Samnite staggered back half a step, and in that moment Marcus understood what made Roman swords different. The Samnite weapon was a slashing blade, designed for wide swings and heroic single combat. The gladius was shorter, designed for the thrust, for stabbing in the press where there was no room for grand gestures. Marcus drove it forward into the Samnite's belly, just above the belt, felt it sink in with sickening ease. The man's eyes went wide with shock and agony. Marcus twisted the blade and pulled it free. The Samnite collapsed. But there was no time to feel anything about it. Another warrior took the fallen man's place immediately, and another pressed from the side. The front ranks of both armies had merged into a single churning mass of violence, where men grunted and screamed and died within arm's reach of each other. This was hoplite warfare, the traditional way of battle. The Romans pushed, the Samnites pushed back, and whichever line broke first would die running while the victors pursued. It had been this way for centuries. Battles were won by the side with greater courage, better position, or simple bloody-minded stubbornness. Marcus found himself gasping for breath. His shield arm burned. He couldn't remember the last time he'd blinked. Around him, men were falling, Romans and Samnites alike, but the lines held. This could go on for an hour or more until one side's will finally shattered. Then Centurion Gaius's voice cut through the madness. First maniple, disengage. Second maniple, forward. For a heartbeat, Marcus didn't understand. Disengage in the middle of battle. That was suicide. The moment you stepped back, the enemy would surge forward and butcher you. But the training was bone deep. Even as his conscious mind rebelled, his body was already moving. He gave one last shield shove against his current opponent, then stepped backward. All around him, the first maniple did the same. Not running, not fleeing, but executing a controlled withdrawal. And through the gaps between their files, the princeps surged forward. These men were older, stronger, their shields less battered, their sword arms fresh. They hit the Samnite line like a new wave crashing against rocks already worn down by the first. The enemy warriors, who had just begun to think they were winning, who had just started to feel their opponents weakening, suddenly found themselves facing fresh troops with fresh strength. Marcus staggered backward, his legs shaking, and collapsed onto the ground 20 paces behind the new front line. Around him, other hastati were doing the same, some wounded, some whole, all utterly spent. He watched a man named Lucius vomit onto the grass. Another, Decimus, was crying silently while he wrapped a strip of cloth around a deep cut on his forearm. "Drink," said a voice. One of the camp followers, an old woman who'd been with the Legion for decades, pressed a water skin into Marcus's hands. He drank greedily, then poured some over his head. The water turned pink as it washed away someone's blood, probably not all his own. "How long?" he gasped. "Until you go back in?" The old woman smiled grimly. "Not long, boy. This is the new way. You don't break them in one push. You grind them down." And she was right. Marcus could already see it happening. The princeps were pushing hard, driving into the Samnite line with terrible efficiency. But they weren't trying to break through in one glorious charge. They were simply applying pressure, killing when they could, defending when they had to, and waiting for the next rotation. 15 minutes later, the horn sounded again. The princeps began their controlled withdrawal, and the hastati, including Marcus, who had barely caught his breath, surged forward again through the gaps, back into hell. This time, Marcus noticed something different about the Samnites. Their formation had gaps that hadn't been there before. The warriors looked tired, really tired. The scarred Samnite who fought Marcus earlier was gone, replaced by a younger warrior whose hands were shaking on his spear. When the lines crashed together this time, there was less force behind the enemy's push. They'd been fighting for 30 minutes without pause, while the Romans had rotated half their front line to rest. It was such a simple thing, almost invisible, but it mattered. Marcus killed 2 men in his second stint at the front, or possibly 3. It was hard to tell when multiple Romans were stabbing at the same target. His arm moved mechanically now, the gladius becoming an extension of his will. Thrust, withdraw, shield up, step forward, thrust again. The training made it almost automatic. Then the horns again. Fall back, let the princeps through. Rest. Rotation. That was the key. The word came from the Latin rotare, to turn like a wheel. The Roman legion was a machine with interchangeable parts, and those parts kept turning, kept applying pressure, never giving the enemy a moment to breathe. By the 3rd rotation, Samnites were openly fleeing their posts. By the 4th, their formation began to ripple and bend. By the 5th, barely 90 minutes into the battle, the line shattered completely. What followed was butchery. The Romans didn't pursue immediately. They'd learned that lesson through hard experience. Instead, they reformed their lines, dressed their ranks, then advanced steadily as the Samnite army dissolved into fleeing individuals. The cavalry, which had been waiting patiently on the flanks, finally had their moment. They swept around and cut down the runners. Marcus didn't participate in the pursuit. He sat on the ground, his whole body trembling with exhaustion and something like shock. Centurion Gaius walked past, blood streaming from a cut on his scalp, grinning like a madman. 47 years, he said to no one in particular. 47 years I've been doing this, and this is the first time I've seen the new system work perfectly. Beautiful, just beautiful. An older soldier, one of the princeps, sat down next to Marcus. His name was Servius, and he'd fought in more battles than Marcus had years of life. First time? Servius asked. Marcus nodded, not trusting his voice. You did well. Saw you take down that big bastard with the scar. Clean kill. Do you know why we won today? The rotations, Marcus managed. Deeper than that, boy. Think about what just happened. Those Samnites are brave, probably braver than us man for man, better warriors individually too. They've been fighting in these mountains since they were children. But bravery runs out, strength runs out. You can only hold a shield for so long, only swing a sword so many times before your arm starts to fail.
Fathers did it. It was all about that first crash. Put your best men in front, charge hard, hope your courage lasts longer than theirs. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. Either way, after an hour, both sides were so exhausted that whoever broke first broke completely. Servius gestured toward the battlefield where Roman burial details were already beginning their grim work. But what we did today, we never got exhausted. Well, we did, but we got to rest. They didn't. We hit them, fell back, hit them again. Fresh troops every 15 minutes. It's not about being braver or stronger. It's about being smarter. It's about understanding that war isn't a duel between heroes. It's work, and work needs to be managed. Marcus thought about this while he cleaned his gladius. The blade had notches in it now that hadn't been there this morning. Each notch was a moment where the sword had caught on bone or been deflected by a shield rim. Each notch was a story he didn't want to remember. The manipular legion, Servius continued, that's what they're calling it. Maniples, handfuls of men organized in checkerboard formation with gaps between units. Lets us move faster than the old phalanx, lets us adapt to terrain, and most important, lets us rotate fresh troops to the front while holding the formation intact. He stood up, stretching his back with audible pops. They say it was developed during the Samnite Wars. Makes sense. These mountains don't let you keep a tight phalanx formation. We had to adapt or die. Turned out what we invented to survive in the mountains works everywhere else too. Over the next few days, as the legion marched back to its camp and Marcus had time to think rather than simply react, he began to understand the true genius of what Rome had created. It wasn't just about rotating troops. It was about an entire philosophy of warfare that was different from anything else in the Mediterranean world. The Greeks fought in phalanxes, massive blocks of men with long spears designed to be an impenetrable wall. It worked brilliantly on flat ground against other phalanxes, but it was rigid, slow to maneuver, and if broken, it couldn't easily reform. Once your phalanx shattered, you were done. The Romans had taken that concept and shattered it deliberately into smaller pieces. Maniples of 120 men, each capable of independent action but coordinated through drill and signals. These maniples could spread out or contract, advance or retreat, pivot or hold as the situation demanded. The gaps between them weren't weaknesses, they were features that allowed flexibility. And the rotation system, the ability to pull tired men back and push fresh ones forward without breaking the formation, that was revolutionary. It meant a Roman army didn't fight at one intensity level that gradually degraded. It fought in waves, each one as strong as the first, until the enemy's ability to resist simply collapsed under relentless pressure. Marcus learned all this not from lectures, but from watching and listening during the long marches and camp evenings. He learned that the Roman military mind worked differently from others. While the Greeks celebrated individual heroes in single battles that decided wars, Romans thought about campaigns, logistics, staying power. A month later, Marcus found himself in another battle. This time, the enemy was a coalition of Samnite and Etruscan forces who learned about the rotations and thought they had a counter. Their plan was simple: refuse to engage fully with the first line of hastati, save their strength, and then overwhelm the Romans with a massive push when both sides were equally fresh. It was a good plan. It failed. The Romans simply adjusted. Instead of pulling the hastati back after 15 minutes, they held them forward for 25, drawing the enemy into committing their reserves. Then they rotated in the princeps and hit the enemy's weakened center, while the hastati swung around to pressure the flanks. The battle lasted less than an hour. "The beauty," explained Centurion Gaius afterward while the legion feasted on captured supplies, "is that we can adapt faster than they can. They see us do something, they plan against it, we do something different. The manipular system is flexible. It's a framework, not a rigid plan. As long as everyone knows the signals, as long as each maniple trusts the ones next to it, we can respond to whatever the enemy tries." Another veteran, a grizzled triarius named Publius, who'd fought the wars against Pyrrhus, added his perspective. "I remember fighting the Greeks when that mad king brought his phalanx and elephants to Italy. Magnificent fighters, the Greeks. Their phalanx was like a bronze wall with spears sticking out. Utterly terrifying. First time we faced them at Heraclea, they slaughtered us." He drank from his cup of wine, eyes distant with memory. "But we learned. That's what Rome does. We learn. We watched how the phalanx moved, where it was strong, where it was weak. Strong in front, weak on flanks and rear. Strong on flat ground, weak on rough terrain. Strong when solid, catastrophically weak when broken. So we used our maniples to pull them out of position, to attack their flanks, to fight on ground that didn't suit them. And when we faced them again at Beneventum, we broke their phalanx into pieces and destroyed them." Publius smiled grimly. Pyrrhus was a brilliant general, maybe the best of his age, but he was fighting the old way. Brilliant tactics, heroic charges, decisive battles. We fought the Roman way. Adapt, persist, grind them down. Marcus was beginning to understand that what he'd witnessed wasn't just a military innovation. It was a reflection of something essential to Roman character. Other nations produced brilliant individuals, great artists, philosophers, generals. Rome produced systems. Rome produced institutions that outlasted any individual. The manipular legion was a perfect example. It didn't rely on having the bravest general or the strongest warriors. It relied on discipline, training, coordination. A mediocre Roman legion using the system properly could defeat a brilliant collection of individual warriors who fought as individuals. Years passed. Marcus survived battle after battle, rising through the ranks. He became a princeps, then finally Patriarius, one of those veterans who only fought when things were serious. He fought in wars against Gauls, against Greeks, against Carthaginians in the nightmare campaigns of the Punic Wars. Through all of it, the manipular system evolved. The gaps between maniples became standardized. The rotation timing became more sophisticated. Commanders learned to read the flow of battle, to know exactly when to pull a unit back and exactly when to commit the next wave. The signaling system became more complex, allowing for coordinated maneuvers that would have been impossible for armies of earlier eras. By the time Marcus was an old man, Rome had conquered most of Italy and was expanding across the Mediterranean. And wherever Rome went, the manipular legion went, adapting to forests and mountains, deserts and plains, always finding a way to apply the same principle: relentless, rotating pressure that never stopped, never gave the enemy time to recover until resistance simply collapsed. Marcus lived to see the destruction of Carthage, Rome's greatest enemy. He remembered standing on a hill overlooking the smoldering ruins and talking with another ancient veteran named Gnaeus. "We weren't always better fighters than them," Gnaeus said, looking at the devastation. "Man for man, the Carthaginians produced warriors as brave as any Roman. They had brilliant generals. Hannibal damn near destroyed us. They had better cavalry, better navy, more money. But we had the system," Marcus finished. "We could lose battles and come back. We could lose armies and raise new ones. We learned from our mistakes and adapted, and we never, ever stopped pushing." "Exactly," Gnaeus agreed. "Hannibal won every major battle for 16 years, killed hundreds of thousands of our soldiers, but we just kept coming back, kept raising new legions, kept applying pressure. Eventually, even Hannibal ran out of tricks. Even he couldn't adapt fast enough to counter a system that could replace its parts and keep functioning." That was the deepest lesson Marcus realized in his old age. The manipular legion wasn't just about military tactics. It was about creating a system that was greater than any individual, that could absorb losses and learn from failures, that applied consistent pressure until the problem was solved. He thought about this as he watched his grandson train with a practice sword. The boy was learning the same drills Marcus had learned 60 years ago, the same thrusts, the same footwork, the same shield positions. The specifics of the legion would continue to evolve. Already there was talk of Marius's reforms that would professionalize the army even further. But the core principle would remain. Rome didn't win through individual heroics or brilliant generals or even superior courage, though the legions had all those things. Rome won through system and discipline and the understanding that victory wasn't about one perfect blow. It was about constant pressure, adapted to circumstances, maintained relentlessly until the enemy's ability to resist simply crumbled. "Grandfather," his grandson asked, "what's the most important thing about being a Roman soldier?" Marcus thought about his first battle, about the terror and chaos, about learning that war was work that needed to be managed. He thought about 60 years of campaigns and the countless enemies Rome had ground down through sheer systematic persistence. "Endurance," he finally said. "Not just physical endurance, though you need that, but the endurance to keep going when things are hard, the endurance to fall back, rest, then go forward again. The endurance to learn from defeat and try again. The endurance to be part of something larger than yourself." He tapped the practice sword in his grandson's hand. Every Roman soldier learns to fight in formation, to rotate with his unit, to trust that when he falls back exhausted, fresh troops will take his place. It's not glorious like the old heroes in the songs, but it works, and in the end, what works is what survives. The boy nodded seriously, though Marcus suspected he didn't fully understand yet. That was fine. Understanding came with time and experience, just like everything else in Rome. The system would teach him just as it had taught Marcus, just as it had taught generations before and would teach generations to come. That night, as Marcus lay in bed waiting for sleep, he thought about Centurion Gaius's words from that first battle so long ago. "They think they know how Romans fight. They're wrong." Every enemy made the same mistake. They saw the Romans coming and thought they understood what they faced. Just another army operating on the same principles as all other armies. They prepared to fight a battle of courage and strength and heroic will. And then the rotations began. Fresh troops moving forward, tired troops falling back, pressure maintained relentlessly, hour after hour, until courage meant nothing because exhaustion stripped it away, until strength failed because no human body could sustain it indefinitely, until heroic will crumbled because will alone couldn't stand against a system designed to outlast it. The genius wasn't complexity, it was elegant simplicity, applied with perfect discipline. Hold your formation, follow the signals, trust your brothers, rotate on command, push when fresh, rest when tired, push again, repeat, until victory. Rome had learned to push through the center, not with one mighty blow, but with 1,000 smaller blows that never stopped coming. The enemy didn't break from overwhelming force, they broke from relentless force applied again and again and again until resistance simply collapsed. It was, Marcus thought, as sleep finally took him, perhaps the most Roman thing ever conceived. Not flashy or dramatic or dependent on individual genius, just effective, systematic, inevitable, and unstoppable.
Up next, if you like content like this, please like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe for more.